Evening, everybody. I'm just making sure that I've got my recording started because I'm bloody rubbish at clicking the record button. It's my, yeah, I forget all the time, all the time. Evening. I hope we're all well. Welcome to today's running injuries kind of masterclassy workshopy type thing. For those of you here that live, brilliant. Thank you very much for taking the time to be here. I do appreciate it. So I'm new to webinars. I've done tons and tons of Zoom. I teach classes and clients and all the rest of it, but webinars are a bit new to me. And the reason why I've chosen to do a webinar version instead of a meeting is because there was that many people that were interested. I thought it'd be kind of really distracting to have lots and lots of little windows open and to sort of give everybody a bit more privacy because we don't all know each other, unlike most of my sessions where we kind of get to know each other a little bit. So that's why. So we'll see how it goes. I've run this sort of this training a few times, fixing running injuries, and I do it sort of just as new people come into my life who are interested in well, not getting injured as much, obviously, mostly runners, but I do work with pretty much anybody who's got a wonky body, really. So again, thank you very much for being here, and we're looking at injuries, running injuries to be precise, and how to fix them. I'm going to go through sort of 4 main points. What is an injury? You know, what is it? Why do we get it? Why are you getting it, and why you're suffering sort of either injuries, pain, niggles, stuff that stops you running or takes the joy out of it. Why rehab isn't always effective, and the sort of running injury prevention tips and tricks that we get sort of fed on the internet don't always work as well as we would think they should, and then precisely what you need to kind of do to sort that out, really. So some of you know me, some of you are here. I can kind of see Claire and Caroline, and there's a few others that are on here tonight that have worked with me over a long period of time. So apologies for boring you, but for those of you who are new, just a teeny tiny bit of background. So, I mean, I am a runner. I started running in my teens, and, you know, pretty much within the first sort of 5 years, 25-ish, started to get the niggles, aches, issues, problems that it started to develop into pain, has started to stop me doing things. So, you know, I was knees, ankles, calves, shin splints, knee problems, IT band problems, lots of the stuff that, you know, the typical runner stuff. Back then, I didn't know what I do now. So I did what what most of us do. We kind of disappear off to a physio or a chiropractor or a podiatrist. I did the physio and podiatrist route. Diagnosed with collapsed arches like you are, and given a very expensive pair of orthotics. Both of them said I'd never run past 15 miles a week, that I might as well give up, and if I didn't give up running, that potentially I was going to injure myself for the long term. You know, and you kind of believe people, don't you? You kind of believe that that's the case. So I continued for years down that route with problems, niggles, injuries, pain, yeah, and carried on with the orthotics as well, particularly. About 2008, I finished up moving to Australia to start off on a journey of doing some personal training qualifications, as it was then, and then athlete rehab, sports therapy, biomechanics, done all sorts. And I got cancer at the same time. So I got cancer in my right butt cheek. So instead of getting breast cancer, I got butt cancer, like you. So two surgeries later to have that removed, I'd got some muscle missing out of my glutes, so I had this real imbalance. So I started working with people who were more interested in how the body works and how it moves and how it doesn't, why it gets injured, what to do about it. And I started just over the last sort of 15-16 years sort of just cobbling that all together. You know, I mean, on another training course this weekend for functional mobility, and on the training course the weekend after for mobility floors, that kind of stuff. So it's a constant learning curve, and you know, the upshot is that I'm bringing all that together as best I can. I don't want to waffle on it too long because I don't use slides, so it can come across as a little bit of a lecture, and I don't want it to be like that. So I'm going to keep it under an hour best I can. And that's why you're here listening to me prattle on tonight. So I'm like I say, bringing it all together. You know, and what I've learned and what I cobbled together actually did work, because a few years after that, well, it was about 5 or 6 years after that, I did finish up running the 100-mile Himalaya stage race out in India without a single blister and no pain. Well, lots of pain, but mainly because it was like that and like that. So my quads were trashed. Yeah, trying to squat behind a tree was entertaining at that point. All right, so let's get cracking. So, let's just define what an injury is. So I'm going to talk to you a lot tonight about tissue, and I don't mean the tissue that you blow your nose with. I mean your connective tissues. So you've got your muscles, your bones, your ligaments, your tendons, all the stuff you've heard of, even most nerves, blood vessels. They're all referred to as connective tissue, and it's bloody obvious, really. They connect shit together. That's as simple as the anatomy is going to get, or as complicated as the anatomy is going to get tonight. So when you hear me talking about tissues, it's because we get very focused on muscles. My hamstrings are tight, my glutes don't fire, and we kind of miss out on all the connective stuff that's around that. There's fascia, there's, like I said, blood vessels, ligaments, tendons, all of that good stuff. And all of those tissues, either individually or combined, and let's really think about it more combined, you have a certain amount of tolerance for stress, right? So your entire life is just a stress on your body. Sitting, standing, the little bit of sunburn that you get when you're outside, a little bit of tweaking the knee that you get when you get out of the car, and you twist in the wrong way. They're just little tiny injuries to your body over just the course of life. And that's all well and good, but if the stress or the load that you're putting on the tissue is more than it's capable of bearing, it's going to break or get injured. It sounds fairly obvious, but we kind of don't think about injuries in that way, like little ones and then big ones. When we're a runner, we just get what we think are quite big ones, because they're the ones that give us the pain and all the rest of it. So tissue responds, so muscles, joints, ligaments, everything in the body, connective tissue, responds to load. And that's how movement has such a big impact on the quality, the strength, the ability of your tissue to manage load or manage stress and stress and not get injured. If the load is not enough, so if you're not putting enough load on your tissues, the tissue starts to disappear, and that's kind of, again, I'm trying not to state the obvious, but if you've broken your arm and you put your arm in a cast or your wrist in a cast for 6 weeks, you come out of the cast and your arm's all thin and wasted because you've lost some of the tissue, whether that's a little bit of muscle and maybe a little bit of bone density, whatever. You've lost some of the tissue, and that's because you've not been using it. So it sounds obvious, but we tend not to think about it like that when it comes to the bigger injuries that we're kind of going to cover later on. For the most part, what we think of injuries to runners tend to be uncontrolled. You didn't go out and roll your ankle on purpose, you didn't go out and get your knee cocked up on purpose, but there is controlled injury. So a controlled injury, an example would be like if you go to the gym and you lift heavy weights, eventually your tissue, so your muscles, would get bigger. So they're just responding to the stimulus you put on them. So when you get to the gym, you lift heavy weights, you get little micro tears in your muscle tissue, and your body goes, oh, okay, and it fixes it, and it puts down more muscle fibers in an effort to sort of protect that area. Little injury, but it's not enough to cause you pain. You might get that delayed onset muscle soreness the next day. You can't go down the stairs or sit on the loo, that kind of thing. But for the most part, your body just kind of recovers, and it stimulates it to create more good stuff. So extra muscle layers, extra tension in the tendons or strength in the tendons and the ligaments. It lays that down as a protective mechanism. The same goes for if you injure yourself, your body goes into overdrive, creating scar tissue. And that's the stuff that can cause stiffness and problems and other issues, stuck around the body. We'll get into that. The reverse is true. If you think about another example would be an astronaut in space. Once they come out of gravity, or gravity is not impacting the body anymore, the bone density decreases. So these are all just examples of stresses and loads on the body. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, and you've got that Goldilocks bit in the middle where the inputs that you're putting in keep your tissues, your muscles, your bones, your joints, everything all nice and healthy. And that's kind of where you want to be, in that middle ground. And this is sort of where we're at tonight, what we're going to be talking about. So this adding and removing of tissue and cells, and this constant regeneration is going on absolutely all the time without your conscious control or even really your knowledge. And if you put the right stimulus in and the right input and the right intensity and level, in other words, you don't go above that threshold where you go into injury, your body, like I say, will add more of the good stuff. But if you don't, your body will start to remove those tissues that you're not using. So your body's very clever because it's constantly wanting to keep you alive, essentially, and keeping tissue, big muscles, stronger tendons, bigger blood vessels to take more blood flow to bigger muscles, those kinds of things, are energy expensive for your body. So that's why we lose stuff. If you don't use it, you lose it. And that's one of the reasons, because it costs your body energy to keep those tissues. So unless you keep stimulating at the right level and keep applying the right loads at the right level, your body will start to just kind of get rid of that little bit of range of motion there and that bit of muscle there and switch that off there. And I would say switch off in the loosest possible terms, but you get the idea. It's kind of just picking and choosing. So your body gets better at what you do with it most. I mean, that's, stating the obvious to a certain extent. So we've got this slow degradation of your body's tissues. It's like it creeps up on us, and it's why we feel as we get older, we feel that we're getting stiffer or weaker, or we don't have as much talent, or you kind of start to lose your idea of where you are in space. And it's not your age that's the problem, it's the length of time you've gone not using a particular range of movement or a particular muscle group or tissue. And eventually you find yourself in more pain, or with more injuries, or with more niggles, or with more stiffness, or with more that feeling of, oh, I used to be able to do that and I can't anymore. So we think it's age, but it's actually more to do with the fact that we've just kind of, over a long period of time, stopped stimulating or stressing or loading the tissues in that Goldilocks space, which would keep all our tissues healthy. And instead, we kind of overuse those parts of us that are getting used all the time. So running, repetitive stress, those kinds of things, to give you an idea. So if we add the, like I say, if we add the load and it's just right, your body adapts and gets better, and the quality of your tissue improves, right? So when it comes like to running injuries, you've got the real uncontrolled stuff. And I'm using rolling your ankle on a curb as an example, just because I had a runner that I was working with last night who's done exactly that. So she, bless her, she signed up for London next year, and she's fallen down a pothole and well, sprained ligaments basically. So she's not in a good way. So we were talking about ways of once she gets out of that swelling and horrible pain phase, we're talking about ways of starting to add load back onto the ligament to get it strong, so that she can carry on running. So anyway, that's you see me, you roll in your ankle, that's the obvious one. You fall over, they're the obvious uncontrolled movements that you finish up with an injury, and you kind of see why. You know why that's happened. It's annoying, but you know why. But then you've got the other stuff that sort of creeps up on you out of nowhere, that knee pain that all of a sudden is just there, and it comes and goes maybe, or it's there all the time, or it's there for a bit and then it goes away and you start running, it comes back. And those are the really they're the frustrating stuff, they're the sneaky stuff. You might have been doing all the stuff, you might be stretching and mobility and strength work, and you're doing all the things, and you've still got this pain or this injury, and it's those kinds of things that there's still the same concept that you've gone beyond what your tissues are capable of dealing with. But why? That's my question. The main reason runners are told that we get injured is because too much, too soon, too much mileage, adding in hills, adding in sprinting, all of that stuff. So we're told that we've overloaded our tissues, muscles, tendons, etc., and that's why they're hurting. In other words, the stress that we put on our tissues was too much for them, and they've gone, no, kaput, we're not doing it. And it kind of, I get all of that, that makes sense. It's essentially what we're talking about. But the question is really why? Why now? Why this injury? Why aren't my tissues strong enough? Why are hers strong enough? I've decreased my running load, my mileage, my time, and my pain hasn't gone away, or I thought it had, and then when I started running again, it's come back. but his hasn't. He's fine. And it's that we're constantly like in this state of why. And there's lots of reasons, there are lots of reasons, but one of the main reasons is the quality of our muscles, tendons, ligaments, joints. And the fact of the matter is that for the most part, as human beings, we're not doing what we have evolved to do. And you might be going, oh, hang on a minute, surely, we evolved to walk and we're supposed to run, and we are, absolutely, we are evolved to be on two legs and to run. But what we didn't evolve, when we evolved from your hunter-gatherer populations, we didn't evolve to exercise and run in the way that we do today. So just as a facetious example, if you were a hunter-gatherer living in a cave, you wouldn't get up in the morning, take a look outside the cave door and think, it's a lovely day, I'm going to go for a run. And you certainly wouldn't have been running on, flat, level, hard surfaces. You wouldn't be running in a straight line just for hours at a time, or even half an hour at a time, for long periods, as you could call it. Just same speed in cushioned footwear. That just wouldn't have happened. You would have run when you had to, like if you were chasing something or you were being chased, it would have been random intervals. You wouldn't have warmed up, you wouldn't have stretched, you wouldn't have cooled down, because you wouldn't have had to. And you probably wouldn't have been suffering sort of repetitive strain injuries. You could argue that their existence was more risky, saber-toothed tiger, whatever. But they were also, back in the day, moving in lots of different ways throughout their lives, instead of just the one way all the time. And so that's, to a certain extent, we live our lives like that. We you know exactly what I'm going to say. We get up, we sit at the table, we eat breakfast, we put on some shoes, we go to the office, we sit down. You might have a manual job, in which case you're still doing the same repetitive stuff over and over again. Your body doesn't know whether it's computer work that's repetitive like this, or an example, I don't know, digging up a road with a pickaxe and doing this in the same hand all the time. It's just repetitive stuff. If you think about running, the repetitive nature of running creates your injuries, such as your Achilles tendonitis or your runner's knee, those kinds of things. So we talk about repetitive strain. So arguably, we're going to think about it that way. We're sort of getting worse at being human with the sort of exercise that we do, because our tissues are not able to cope with what life is throwing at them. And we know that's the case because we've got a stiff bit and a sore bit and a wonky bit. So we know there's something, the inputs are not right because our body's not working the way it should. And it's essentially it. So, why do we get running injuries? So, this concept of running for arbitrary distances, 5Ks, 10Ks, etc., or any sport, tennis, golf, yoga, Pilates, anything like that, is those exercise regimes. We've made them up. Human beings have made them up to make up for the fact that we're not doing what we need to be doing on a daily basis, what we evolved to be doing. We're not doing what we should be doing on a daily basis. So we try to make up for it with bouts of exercise. And when we get better at a particular sport or exercise, I'm just going to pick golf as an example, running would be another one, but because of the repetitive nature of it, you're putting a lot of stress on some tissues and pretty much none on others. And you might have heard me bang on about feet and shoes and all the rest of it, but we kind of think that we go out running on our feet and our feet are involved, and of course they are, but they're not actually moving when they're in your shoe. They're not absorbing the load and the impact your shoe and your legs are, your knees and that kind of thing. And that's how extra cushioning in your shoes can be problematic for your knees, because your feet are supposed to manage some of that impact and they're not getting the opportunity to do that. Anyway, different story. But from an evolutionary point of view, we evolved to move in lots of different ways throughout the day, and that's not what we do. So instead we go, I don't know, 45 minutes an hour to the gym 3 to 4 times a week. And even there, we're moving in very specific directions. And to a certain extent, we're told that we have to do that. If you go to the gym or you've ever worked with a trainer or something like that, you're told your feet should be here when you squat, your knees should track over track over your toes, they shouldn't cave in. You go to this distance, you put the bar here. Running's the same, you know, this is how you run for this amount of distance, you just get better over time. Here's a training plan to get better at doing that distance over time. Just repetitive stresses, whether it's the gym, sitting at a desk, digging up the road with the pickaxe, they're all repetitive. And in terms of exercise, it's very structured and very, you know, I'm going to go to the gym for X amount of time, I'm going to go running for X amount of time, or I'm going to burn this many calories, or I'm going to do this class, and it's all crammed into this very small space. So essentially, what we're doing is taking 24 hours of available load and movement opportunity and trying to cram it in to a, I don't know, 30-minute, 90-minute workout. And it's not that that's wrong, it's just you're almost asking to get injured, because we're trying to cram everything that we need to achieve with our body into such a small space of time. And we've been told the usual, you need to do this many minutes of exercise a week to keep your heart healthy, and you need to get your heart rate up above a certain amount, and high intensity interval training is brilliant for you. And it's not that that's not the case. You know, high intensity interval training, when it's done right, great, no problem. But it's got us to thinking that unless we're breathing hard and sweating and feeling like we're crawling out of whatever exercise it is we've done, whether it's a tough run, a high intensity thing, body pump, a hard game of golf. I don't know, do you do a hard game of golf? No. Haven't done it. What would people who have, but not me. But you know, if we're saying our movement was supposed to be divided up over a period of 24 hours, and we think about our guy in the cave, or our woman in the cave woman, you know, she would have got up and she'd have been moving all day. And of course, you know, we've got lives. I mean, we can't do that. I'm not suggesting that you go live in a cave and swing from a tree and forage for your food and hunt wildebeest. But it will give you an idea, our body still works like that, in the sense that it needs the inputs in order for all of this to work. And just doing that hard workout is sometimes less than ideal for what you're trying to achieve. Let's put it that way. All right. So, it's sort of, if we look at it like that, it does give us a little bit of a clue as to why when we're injured, the usual rehab exercises, more exercise, do more, you know, foam roll this, stretch that, etc., might not be quite as effective as we like to think it will be. So, you know, how you move on a day-to-day basis does matter, and how you walk, run and move as you are now is a direct result of how you've moved over your entire lifetime. You know, if you like, going back to the hunter-gatherer thing, if you lived as a hunter-gatherer, you wouldn't need to exercise, just life would take care of the movement that you needed. You'd be moving all your body parts throughout the full ranges of movement in lots of different random ways, instead of just the same way over and over and over and over and over and over like we do. You'd be doing it in random ways because you just live in life. You wouldn't be thinking, right, I've got to cram 30 squats in here, or 3 sets of 10, and then I've got to go and do so many lunges and so many push-ups, or examples. Golf, tennis would be another example. So we are modern humans, we have to sit at a desk, we have to ride in cars, we have to wear shoes, and as a result, we have to think about artificially moving to try and offset a lifetime of sofa surfing. You know, I'm being a little bit facetious. You know, we don't all sofa surf, but to a certain extent, if you look around your house, you'll probably find that, I mean, I'm looking around my house and this is me. Everything, there's a seating surface in pretty much every room. There's a chair, a bench, there's 6 chairs, and the dining table. I've got 2 sofas in here, there's sofas in the living room, upstairs, the bed, obviously. So, you know, there's a seating surface everywhere, because that's what we do. You know, you go somewhere, sit down, we're invited out for dinner, sit down. So we're trying to offset all this lack of movement that we do, but we're doing it in such a way that's quite stressful on the body, which then adds to or compounds the potential injuries that we experience as runners, but then also the life injuries that we experience, which is just that, oh, you know, I'm a bit stiff this morning, or my back's a bit sore, or my shoulder doesn't seem to be quite as great as it once was, and oh, balance on one leg today, and it just wouldn't have it. So I'm just going I'm kind of jumping about a bit here, aren't I? I'm aware of that. I'm kind of off on a tangent. But I do want to think about babies. Not having had one myself, but most of you will have done. It seems to be the done thing. When you're a baby, you really are born like a blank slate. You're given very, very few movements to start with. They're just kind of twitch reflexes. You're given a little bit of flexion and a little bit of extension, and that's about it. But eventually, you know, they learn how to lift the head, then they turn over, perhaps they push up onto the hands, they roll. Eventually, they kind of drag themselves up on something, stand up, and then they start walking. And they do that all without thinking about it, and all without being told how to do it by a trainer or somebody kind of stood at the side of them shouting out instructions. You know, it happens without any conscious control, but we aren't pre-programmed to do that. The body and the brain learn by trial and error. Everything movement-wise, or every moment that you are alive, there's some kind of signal or input coming into the body, into the brain, and it's constantly monitoring that with or without your knowledge or attention, we should say. So if you do a task and it's successful, like a baby would, you repeat the movement. If the baby tries to stand up and take a step and it falls on its arse, it will find a slightly different way of doing it. If the movement isn't successful, exactly that. You'll do it slightly differently until you find a way of doing it that is successful. And it's all about getting things, really. You know, as human beings, we start to realize that if we reach for something, we can get something, whether it's food or shelter, and we're talking about the obvious stuff. But as babies, the input is somebody smiling at them, giving them encouragement, those kinds of things. They want a toy, or they see something, or they get curious, or they want to, and that's how they learn to crawl. They want to get something or get somewhere. And so as babies, you're born with all the hardware that you will ever need for everything that you want to do, assuming that you've not got any kind of serious issue that you're born with. We're talking about just your general population, just us. So you're born with all the hardware, and the hardware being your joints, your ligaments, your tendons, your muscles, that connective tissue. You've got it all. You've got the ability to do a full squat. You've got the ability to do the splits. You've got full range of movement, all your joints. Everything just works. So again, we're back to that. Your body's dead clever. If you don't use it, you lose it. If you don't stimulate the joints, the tissues, and to maintain themselves by moving in lots of different ways, eventually we'll lose the ability to go into those ranges that you don't use on a regular basis. That's hence why most people can't squat comfortably anymore. You know, they're completely chair-shaped. And then you look at Indian people, or Asian people, those people that still use the squat. It doesn't matter how long their femurs are or what shape the hip joints are, they're still squatting. And they're squatting and comfortable down there and spend hours there because they've spent hours there. And for us, life is essentially getting in the way. You know, we were born with all these amazing full ranges of movement, hips that were just, oh, and arms that were just, hey. And all of those ranges kind of get nibbled away at by life. You know, we'd spend hours in shoes, in seats with our repetitive working patterns, our computers, our televisions, and then we choose to go out and do weird and wonderful sports that, you know, again, repetitive. It's an exercise routine, or we don't do anything, sit on the sofa. And so life is still just nibbling away all the time, nibbling at our ability to move in all the ways that we don't use, because your body will not keep those ways that you don't move. And you could argue to a certain extent, you know, if you don't need a range of movement, why bother keeping it? And so this is where the splits come in. It's splits as an example. You know, if you used to do the splits when you were 5 and you keep doing the splits sort of daily or weekly or whatever until you're 65, you will still be at splits at 65 because you've just constantly given your body that input that it needed. And you're probably sat there looking at the screen and going, I don't want to do splits. I'm not that bloody interested. I just want to run without injuries. But the greater the range of movement and control over those ranges of movement that you have, you don't need to do the splits, by the way. It's just just a big example. Some of you might be able to do the splits at some point. I used to be able to do when I was a martial art person, and now I've lost some of my flexibility over time. That's because I'm not that bothered. I don't need to do the splits anyway. So the less range of movement that you've got means you've got less ability to control ranges that you have no experience of, if that makes sense. So we took back to that idea of this uncontrolled movement, or going into something, a range of movement or a position by accident, and then you get injured. So that would be an example, would be, you know, an example would be somebody falling off that pothole and rolling their ankle. Now, there is some argument to say that it's an accident and it might have happened anyway. But if you are, how can I put it? If you weren't running in such structured shoes, you probably would have felt the edge of the pothole through the leaves that were causing the problem, and you would have had more strength in the ankle and down the side of the leg, potentially the ligaments as well, to deal with it. So if you have full range of movement in the ankle and it's a healthy ankle joint, it should be able to cope with a little bit of rolling. Yeah, and of course it depends on the size of the roll and all the rest of it, but gives you an example. Or you kind of you're doing a hill sprint and you get that tendon, hamstring tendon pull from doing your hill sprint. It's because the hamstrings have been forced into a range of movement or stress under quite a high load that's just not used to. So if you had better quality tissue, more range of movement around the joint, better tendon quality, better muscle, arguably your hamstring wouldn't get injured when you did your hill sprint. So essentially what we're talking about is the more capability of your body, the more ranges of motion, the bigger this buffer zone is that you've got to deal with the uncontrolled things that not just running throws at you, but life throws at you as well. You know, we've all, I don't know, get drunk, party on a Saturday night, and I'm not admitting to this. I'm not admitting to demonstrating various Pilates and yoga moves when under the influence of alcohol on an evening. It's been a while. And then damaging your hamstring from trying to do the splits. So, I mean, we've all got experience of saying something along the lines of, I used to be able to do X, but now I can't, you know. Like I say, we think it's our age. It really isn't. It is literally just how long you are not spending working your body in a way that it understands, or that putting the inputs in that give you the result that you want. We think we are, and you know, we live in this culture, like we've talked about the exercise, and it's not like I'm sitting here going, don't exercise, don't go out and run, don't go to the gym, don't do body pump, don't do golf, don't do the things that you enjoy. It's just thinking a little bit more, you know, a little bit beyond that, a little bit more widely, and going, well, if those things are so good to me, why is everything so good for me? Why is everything still sore? You know, that's the question in my mind. So we got this idea of, so why this injury, why now? So we know that new injuries, the load was too much, and the tissue couldn't cope, whether it's repetitive or rolling of the ankle. Something couldn't cope with what you were doing with it. Fine. But weirdly, not weirdly, the biggest predictor of what future injury you're going to get is actually past injury. So if you do roll your ankle, the chances are you'll roll it again. I mean, it's kind of common knowledge, but there's ACL injuries, knee problems, hip problems, lower back problems, that constant getting a lower back. Every 3 months my back goes out, you know, it's the predictor of future injury is one that you've already had. Chances are you're going to get it again, and like I say, some of you probably experienced that. It's not particularly pleasant. So another problem that we've got really is the process of rehab that we use now, that we go through in this sort of day and age, if you like. You know, if you've been injured, you might have gone to see the physio, the chiropractor, the osteopath, the acupuncturist, sports therapist. And you'll have been asked to potentially, or you might have already done it yourself, you know, stop or reduce how much running you do. So you're reducing the load on the tissue that's damaged. And you kind of go, yeah, makes sense. That makes sense. And you might have been rubbed and poked and prodded and stuck with some needles and given some exercises that you followed faithfully. Everybody follows their physio exercises faithfully, I know you do. But the sole focus of rehab is to get you back to where you were. It's to get you back to your pre-injury state so that you can go back to doing what you were doing, in this case, running. It could, I could give you other examples, but we're talking about running injuries tonight. Lower back pain would be another example. You've got physio, it gives you a rub, to get you back to where you were so you can go back to work, whatever. Can you kind of see a problem there? It's a bloody great big problem, because why would you rehab somebody to the same level of tissue tolerance that they got injured at, doing the thing that they're going to be going back to? So I don't know whether it's like, I was kind of like, oh yeah, that's a big question. That's a big question. Why would we do that? And is it because we just assumed that we might have done some of those physio exercises? Maybe we think we're stronger. Maybe we think that it's enough to get back to the level where we've never kind of really thought about. Oh well, shit, yeah, that's not surprised that I keep getting injured then, because if I just keep rehabbing back to the level that I was, and then potentially I've got scar tissue in there, or in the rolled ankle case, a little bit of ligament laxity. Oh yeah, going to get injured again. So we kind of think about rehabbing beyond the level that we're going to get injured at, so that we don't get injured, and that's that buffer zone. Yeah, that's that buffer zone. So if your tissue tolerance is here, and you're coming up to poke it and you go through it, and that's your injury, if you can shift your tissue tolerance to here, and this is where your load is at when you run, you've got all this space to go into before you run the risk of developing another injury. I hope that makes sense. This is all weird hand movements. So essentially, when we rehab, we're just not increasing the capacity of the tissue to withstand the loads that we're placing on it, which leads us kind of into this last bit about what to do. What do you need to do to drastically reduce your injuries, your niggles, your pain, your tightnesses, your lack of balance, your inability to get up off the floor or get down to the floor, etc. So we can either reduce the load on the tissues. Who wants to do that? Not very many of us. If we're runners, we kind of like, we want to run pretty much till the day that we drop dead. So we don't want to be reducing the load that we do. In fact, most of us would actually prefer to improve our performance. We want to get better at it, not worse, which means you need to run more. If you want to be good at running, you've actually got to run. So the only way to do it then is to make your tissues more capable of dealing with the loads. And how do we do that? So like I said right at the beginning of this, we tend to focus on muscles. There's this huge focus on strengthening your quads to look after your knees, to strengthen or to stretch your hamstrings because they're tight, whatever that means. There's this big influence, I've said it myself, your glutes aren't firing properly, and why? Why are your glutes not firing properly? So we've got this this big focus on the muscles, and sometimes the tendons, which, the muscles attached to a tendon, which attaches around the joint, and that's how you move. And of course, the muscles and the tendons and what have you, they're obviously involved in movement, absolutely. But without your joints, you wouldn't be able to move at all. So, how do we move? We move via our joints. So here's my elbow joint, here's my wrist joint, finger joints, just because that's the bit that I can get in front of the camera. And all a joint is a space in the body. So if you didn't have a space here and a space here and spaces here, it wouldn't move. You wouldn't need muscles and tendons and ligaments. None of that stuff would exist because there'd be no movement available to it. So joints are where the magic happens. And we want as much range of movement in our joints as we can possibly get. And that, again, it doesn't mean, and so when I say as we can possibly get, I'm going to be a bit more specific than that. As much as we could possibly get would be the splits, as an example for your hips, right? So I keep banging on about that, though. You can see I want to get there again at some point. But it's not like we need all of that range of movement. We just need enough to do all the things that we want to do on a day-to-day basis So we need enough range in our ankles to be able to run properly. We need enough rotation in the knee to be able to deal with rotational forces. We need enough movement in the hip to be able to get the thigh behind us so that we push off with those big glute muscles. And most of us, in fact, pretty much guaranteed, everybody here, unless you are doing some serious mobility and functional mobility work, will have lost some range of movement at pretty much every joint in the body. Spinal joints, you know, how many of us have got a stiff neck? You know, how many of us are struggling to get our arm past our ear straight up without the elbow bending or without your body kind of having to contort? And even if it's only a little bit, even if you've only lost a little bit of range of movement in one of those joints that your body needs to do whatever it is that you love to do, it means that something else has to do that job for you, right? So something else has to get involved to do the job of the hip that can't get into full extension. So if you can't get your thigh bone behind you as much as you need to do the type of running that you want to do, your pelvis will have to tip in order to do that. So if you're tipping your pelvis for 30,000 running steps when you go out, and it's going to take its toll on your lower back doesn't want to be a hip. Your lower back wants to be a lower back, and it wants to be nice and stable and doing its job and keeping everything nice and solid and stable. It wants your hip to be a hip, and the hip should do lots of movement. It's supposed to be a mobile joint. If it's not able to do that, lower back takes over. That's just an example. Knees get a beating as well. So the only thing that maintains a healthy joint is movement. You can inject it full of steroids, you can change your diet, you can take supplements, you can rub shit on them, but without movement, your joints will not be healthy. And by healthy, you start to lose range of movement, the surfaces get rougher. This, you know, eventually we're talking about arthritis way down the line, but it starts with losing ranges of motion in the joint. And so cartilage in the joint, everybody knows what cartilage is. It doesn't have a particularly great blood supply. So the only way that it can get nutrients in to look after itself, to maintain itself, to keep itself healthy, is when you move, essentially, you know, if I go back to my elbow again, so here's my elbow. As I close my elbow, the joint closes and it squishes out all the fluid. It squirts it out and it takes all the crap with it. And then when I open my elbow, it, like a sponge, it sucks fluid back in, and that's what keeps your cartilage healthy. A bit simplistic, but you get the idea. If it's not doing that, if it's not going through those ranges of movement, or if it's not moving, the cartilage doesn't get the nutrients that it needs, and it starts to degenerate. I mean, it's not particularly rocket science. This is happening in all your tissues all over your body. If you don't use it, you lose it. Doesn't matter what tissue it is, and that's why I'm talking about tissues, because it's all pretty much the same stuff. It's just stuff in your body. It's just all the same stuff made out of very similar stuff, and you don't use it, you lose it, and it gets niggling, painful, stroppy. So, like I say, you need movement to look after your joints. Now, you know, again, without stating the obvious, your muscles, your tendons, your ligaments can restrict how much range of movement you've got in your joints. So if you've got particularly, I'm calling it tight, I'm not a great fan of the word tight because it implies like short, and that's not really how things are. So if we talk about muscles not being able to yield as well, so they're under too much, I'm going to say under too much tension, because that's dictated by your brain. Your brain dictates how much range of movement you've got. So your muscles and your tendons, etc., can limit how much range of movement you've got at the joints. And we kind of, you know, most of us have kind of at some point gone, oh, crikey, I'm getting a bit stiff. Oh, I used to be able to touch my toes. Can't touch my toes anymore. Well, let's go and do some stretching, or go to a yoga class or a Pilates class, or I've taught all these things, by the way, I still do, right? So I'm not slagging off movement sessions, but we get obsessed with doing some stretching or some rolling, or we go get rubbed and get some massage, and we kind of start to realize that our slowly decreasing ranges of movement might be contributing to these aches and pains that we've got, and the lower backache and the shoulder problem. And it's not been a big stretch really to see how less ability to move around your joints can cause problems for pretty much any sport, including your running, and also potentially, excuse me, lead to your injuries and overuse problems. Like I say, life is constantly nibbling away at your ranges of motion, because if you don't go there, how often do you turn your head now to look over your shoulder? We used to do that quite a lot because we had to reverse. Now we've got parking sensors and all the rest of it. So, you know, the body is just amazing. And there's this law of specificity. I love that word. Specificity is specific. You get better at what you do most. Doesn't matter whether it's sitting on your arse at 90-90 at the hips and knees, your body will stay there in that shape to a certain extent. That's why you can't do a full squat. If you want to run fast, you have to at some point train fast. You have to do some sprinting. You cannot train slow and get better at faster running. So same with anything, you know, if you want to get better at golf, you go play golf. You want to get better at tennis, you go play tennis. If you want to do the splits, you have to do the splits. And you know, at least, you know, practice getting into those ranges of motion. But whatever you want to do, you need to make sure that your tissues are capable of dealing with the load that you're going to be putting on them when you do it. Yeah. So the only way to ensure that running isn't going to injure you either now or in the future or whatever is ensuring that you've got all the ranges of motion that you need around all of the joints involved. Kind of sounds obvious, doesn't it? Not just for running, for life as well. You know, whether that's, I don't know, playing football with your grandkids or your kids, staying mobile as you age, reducing the risk of arthritis. A lot more goes into arthritis than just movement, but it is a biggie. Reducing falls and reducing the need for joint replacements, those kinds of things. And we think we're doing everything we need to do, but we're not, and that's kind of where we're at right now. So we've got flexibility, which is what most of us kind of go, oh yeah, I'm flexible or I'm stiff as a board. And but then you've got mobility as well. Some of you heard me talk about this before. So very briefly, flexibility is just the ability to bend usually without breaking. Something's flexible, you can bend it, it moves, doesn't break. Very passive. And flexibility in the body, in and of itself, is pretty useless. So mobility, which we sometimes use the words interchangeably, mobility, on the other hand, is movement, it's active, and it's the control of the flexibility. So you can't have mobility without flexibility, but you can have flexibility without mobility. For those super bendy people, we're not talking about hypermobility tonight, so leave that on. We're just talking about us. General, I'm not going to call us normal. Anybody here normal? I'm not normal, don't want to be. So anyway, functional mobility, it requires you to be flexible, absolutely. But you also need your nervous system, so your brain and all the nerves and all the bits that carry the information up to your brain to be able to control that range of motion. And that's what mobility is, or functional mobility is. And when you develop functional mobility, so you've got the control over a bigger range of movement, you increase your tissue's capacity to withstand force. So put in other words, when you develop a greater range of movement, or you've got a better range of movement around the joints, better range of movement around the joints, the tissue actually changes. So we're talking about the tendons, your ligaments, your muscles, bones, fascia, all of that changes or gets more capable of dealing with stress, force, impact, load. Get hit by a bus, still ain't going to matter, but for our purposes tonight, that's what we're talking about. So you notice I called this webinar like fixing running injuries. You can't prevent them. You just can't prevent injury. That's everything day to day. There's little injuries, there's big injuries, there's stuff that we recover from fairly quickly. I woke up with a really bad knee Monday morning, couldn't teach on it, couldn't kneel down. Monday night, it's gone. It's a little bit sore, but it's gone. No idea what I've done. I've not done anything, not been running because I've had a nasty cold. So it just comes out of nowhere, and that's like, oh, right, what's happened there? So we can't prevent it. It's going to happen, but we can make your tissues more resilient, so it's less likely to happen. We can make them more capable of recovering quicker as well. And we can make them more able. So you're talking about that buffer zone again. We're extending the buffer zone. So you can come into this section here, which would have injured you before and isn't going to injure you now. But at some point, you might go even beyond that, might be something, like I say, getting hit by a bus is going to take you way above that threshold, and back into sort of, but you know, we're not talking about buses tonight. All right, so flexibility, passive stretching. Should we be stretching? Should we not? That's usually one of the things that runners come up with. So stretching, it does work. It makes you more flexible, absolutely. But we've talked about the fact that flexibility in and of itself isn't particularly useful. You don't have any control over it, or much control over it. And I mean, the research, or there is research out of research to prove every point, isn't there? I'm not trying to prove a point here. The research would suggest that passive stretching, prior to doing running in particular, you know, yeah, let's stick with running. Prior to running, actually increases your chance of injury. And the reason why is because if you stretch a tissue, it gets temporarily, it's in a lengthened state, so it's temporarily less capable of dealing with load. So as runners, you don't want a slinky spring to run on. You want a sort of stiff pogo stick spring to run on. You want to be springy. So that requires a certain amount of stiffness. So you don't want to be stretching your springs before you go out and run. That said, most of us aren't doing the sort of long stretching, the long holds that you would need to do to put length into the tissues to make them more susceptible to injury. So there's pros and cons to it. Ultimately, however, foam rolling, massage, pins, needles, acupuncture kind of stuff, hot stones, yin, all passive inputs. So stretching does develop flexibility, and it can start to change the quality of your tissues. But really, all that's happening is your body and your brain just get more tolerant of the stretching that you're doing. So if you've got a certain range of movement in your one muscle, and it goes to here, and you passively stretch it and stretch it and stretch it and stretch it, it'll come back. And then you do it a bit more and it stays a bit longer, and it's constantly doing that. And it's just your body then just starts to go, oh, I'm getting more tolerant of this stretching stuff. I'll let you go there. Yeah. But that extra elasticity of your muscles really is useless because you don't have any control over it. And unless you've kind of, it's difficult to explain if you've never seen somebody who does have a range of, if you think about, I don't know if you've ever seen those people that when they put the arm out, the elbow actually bends the other way, or the knees bend. So you talk about people that have got sort of, what do they call it? Double jointed, you know, those people that are double jointed. Their joints are unstable because of the amount of flexibility that they've got in the muscles. So they're flexible, but they don't have the ability to control it, or the strength to control that extra range that they've got. And you know, we kind of we know the nervous system is massively involved in, so your brain and your nerves are involved in how much range you're allowed to have. Because if you can be as stiff as a board, but if you go under a general anaesthetic, all of a sudden you've got these, you know, super ranges of movement. You're like an octopus. So you don't stay stiff when you're under a general anaesthetic. You become all super flexible, and that's because we've knocked out your brain. Your brain essentially is out of the equation. So it's very injured. It's injured. Very easy to get injured under general anaesthetic if you drop you or whatever, because your brain isn't kind of holding everything together, as it were. So not only do you need to expand the range of motion, but you then need to be able to control it at those ranges as well. So essentially what we're saying is, if your brain doesn't trust you with a range of movement or a range of motion, it won't let you get there, regardless of what you do with it. And if you do get there, there's a very good strong chance that you might get injured. It's why you look at people who move, like martial artists, again, ballet dancers, gymnasts, those kinds of things. They've got super duper ranges of movement, but they're not flinging their leg in the air with momentum. They're lifting it up in a very slow and controlled fashion. It's all the control, all the strength that needs to be there to get that leg over their head. We could talk about whether that's great for your joints or not. I'm, you know, on the fence with that one. I think that sort of strength and control is amazing. So it's easier for your nervous system to register a stretch outside of the zone that it's comfortable with. So we've got our zones. So you turn your head to one side, you will find the point at which your neck goes, that's enough. And that position is the one that your brain has kind of gone, oh, she goes there, but she doesn't really go much further. She goes there, but she doesn't really go much further. She goes there, she spends some time here. So all this free movement that we've got from side to side that you don't feel anything with, that's your range of motion. You get to the end of that, that's your end range. Your body will let you go a little bit further. There's usually a little bit more that you could wring out of it. Breathe in, you breathe out, you'll find that there's an extra bit. And those are the bits that are right at your end zone. And then you're trying to extend that. And that extra bit is what gives you the buffer zone that you need from an injury perspective. So, stating the obvious, you can't move where you can't move. If you haven't moved in a certain range for years and years and years, that tissue is gone. There's no way for that tissue to mitigate injury. There's no way to improve performance because there's no information coming into the brain from those tissues to tell the brain or to tell it how to increase performance or get stronger or whatever. And without that information coming in the form of input movement through the full range, your brain just starts to ignore those parts of you that aren't sending that information anymore. So you have to teach your body or your system, how to use the ranges of movement that you add. Your tissues then adapt, they become more resilient and they become less easily damaged. That's the whole thing really. If you develop better freedom of movement in your joints, you'll be able to compensate for more, for more variables. That little pothole that you dropped into on the ankle isn't an issue anymore because you've got stronger ankles and feet that can feel the floor, whatever it is. Yeah, you can become less susceptible to injury. That's the idea. That bigger buffer zone helps you deal with as much as possible as what life's throwing at you, running day-to-day basis, etc., etc. So we can argue that unless you're doing some kind of serious functional movement, you're not going through full range of movement of your joints. You might think you are, but it's very unlikely. I don't want to go into I'm conscious of the time. I don't want to keep you too long, but essentially, if you are lacking some ranges of movement, like we said, like the hip as an example, but you go to the gym to lift weights and you're taking a lack of range of movement because you've not been there. So the squat would be an example. If you can't do a decent squat, then you've no real business putting a big bar on your shoulders with some weights on it and adding load to it. You want to work on getting your hips working and your ankles, getting full range of movement at all your joints so that you can squat well and then add some weight to it. Because if you don't and you take your crappy ranges of movement and your crappy tissues into a gym environment or anything else for that matter, tissues can't withstand the load, get injured potentially. So what else? Let me think. I mean, yeah, just going back to that strength training, just because I'm a big proponent of strength training for runners. It can help, it does help. I like strength training. I think strength training is great, but it's got to be done on the back of a body that moves well in the first place, rather than just throwing weights at something. Even I don't want to pick out strength training, Pilates, yoga, corrective work, restorative work. All of those things are great. If you think about it, they're still just constantly taking you through the same movements or the same motions over and over and over again. We're missing that idea of this variability, this moving in lots of different ways all the time. And we know this is true because, like I say, if it wasn't true, we wouldn't get all these, the pain, the discomfort, the lack of being able to move, the lack of being able to balance, perhaps, all the things that you're losing, that wouldn't be happening. It's not your age. So none of that stuff would be happening if we were giving the body the right input. We had full range of movement. We were taking our body through this, through these variable ways of moving. The inputs that come into our body via movement, they come into special cells that are embedded in your joints, muscles, tendons, etc. And these little sensors, and they tell your brain exactly where your body is in space and what it's doing and how much range you've got, those kinds of things. And that's why you know, if I work with somebody who's young, so if I wanted to teach I don't know, an 11-year-old, something like that, somebody who's young, how to move, it takes it's a much shorter process to get somebody to even copy a movement when they're young, because all those little special cells, they're all working really well. So the joints are all clean, they've still got great range of movement, they've got all the tissues that they need with all those little cells sending all this information to the brain, information, all this input, everything's there, the hardware's all working brilliantly. But if you don't use those tissues, like we said, you lose them. You're not just losing the muscles and the joint range of motion and some tendons and all that stuff. You're actually losing the little cells that tell your brain. So you start to lose the ability to transfer the information that's coming from your body to your brain. Your brain literally becomes almost blind and deaf to what's happening in your tissues and your joints. And we kind of know that's true. So I don't know if you might have experienced this yourself. I have. But it's why when I teach somebody new movement at sort of 40, 50, 60 and beyond, I've taught some older people than that, it's been really challenging because they literally don't know where the body parts are. And it's kind of amusing. You know, they'll swear blind that their leg is straight, and go, straighten your leg, and they'll look at it and go, God, I thought it was straight, and it's better at a bloody right angle. And it's not that they're old and decrepit and the brain's just stopped working. Literally, there's nothing there. It's none of those special feedback cells to tell the brain what it's doing. So it doesn't actually know. And until they look at it and kind of go, oh, my leg's not straight, then. So it's not their, like I say, it's not the age or the lack of coordination and what have you. They'll say something along the lines of, oh my God, I've never been flexible, I've never been coordinated, I've never been able to dance or do Zumba or whatever it is. And that's rubbish. You know, it's just the fact that you've never, or certainly not for a very, very long time, been using those tissues, and they're just gone. That information is all gone. So, you know, until the day that you die, this is the good part, that's the depressing part, this is the silver lining. Literally, until the day that you keel over and you take your last breath, your body is constantly listening to those signals. And if you improve, like I say, if you improve your range of movement and you get strength and control over those ranges and you create that buffer zone, not only do you bring back the range of motion and the ability of your tissues to yield and be strong and all the rest of it, but you bring back that feedback loop as well. And I don't want to kind of put too much of a silver line on it, because, you know, unfortunately, as we age, you do lose some tissue, you lose some muscle mass, things do change, there's no getting away from that. But they don't change as quick as they are doing for most of us if you put the right stuff in. Put the right stuff in, get the right stuff out for the rest of your life, barring some unforeseen, you know, major issue. That's just the way. That's, you know, not an awful lot we can do. So, very quick recap. You know, injury is just an insult or stress to the tissues of the body. It can be controlled, it can be uncontrolled, it can be to your benefit. You know, like putting on, like getting extra ranges of movement. It's a stress on the body, but if you can control it and get strength in it, it's good for you. So it can be to your benefit or your detriment. We want to improve the ability of your tissues to withstand the stress of what you're doing. In our case, that's running. We need to accept that exercise and cramming everything into sort of 30, 60 minutes is just not really what we were designed to do. Not saying stop, just saying think about that. Accept that that's not what we were designed to do, and we need to add to it. Your joints have already, and your joints and tissues have already lost quality or capacity, because if they hadn't done, you wouldn't be sat here listening to me. So it's a slow decline. You might not see it. So now is the time to do something about it. You improve all of that with your functional mobility, your targeted flexibility, building strength and controlling those new ranges, which will make your tissues more robust and more capable of withstanding loads, give you that bigger buffer zone, give you that ability to do more with what you've got. Just like when you were younger, you get some of that back. Not all of it, like we said, you know, you get older, stuff changes, shit happens. We know that, but it doesn't have to happen as quickly or as badly as it potentially is due for some of us. Get past that whole age is the problem thing. It's not. Everything's alterable, like I said, till the day that you die. And, you know, one of the main things is accepting that if you really want to sort your running injuries out, or, you know, improve your performance, reduce the chances of injury, or improve your ability to recover from injury when it does happen, you're going to have to do something other than just run it. You're just going to have to. I've had to accept that fact. You need to work out exactly what's missing in your ranges of motion, exactly where your problems are. So you're not pissing time away working on stuff that you don't need to work on. You know, find out exactly what you need to do and work on that to improve your overall strength, your overall mobility, and your overall ranges of movement, so that when you do the repetitive stuff, it's not such a big strain on your body. If that's what you want to do, I just want to get you in a position that you can do that. Yeah, that should be the focus. What do you want to do with your life? I want to do X, Y, who cares? I like doing whatever it is, running stupid distances. Great. If that's what you want to do, let's work on the things that are going to make you able to do that with less stress on the body. You know, so that's what I do. This is not a sales pitch. I work with groups. Most of you know that because you're in some of my groups. And I work with individuals on an individual basis. And pretty much anybody who's serious about improving their functional mobility and getting better at whatever it is they want to do, whether that's just life, that's a worthwhile goal in itself. Getting the ranges of motion you need to stay healthy for life is brilliant. Getting more mobility or strength or whatever it is so that you can run, brilliant, you know, and that's what I do. So if you're interested in learning more, I'd be happy to chat to you. You'll get, there's a link coming for the replay for those of you on here, but those of you who wants to listen to me again, you're not going to listen to me again, let's be fair, but you'll get a link for the replay, and there'll be a booking thing on there if you want to book in for just a chat. You know, if you want to pick my brains or you've got something specific going on and you want to know more about what I do, or you want some help, just give me a shout. There's some group stuff coming up in December. There's some functional mobility sessions coming up in the new year. They're grouping on Zoom, and I've got some taste of flow sessions. I'm doing some new, I'm studying something new, and I'm not allowed to tell you what it is, but that's what we're going to be learning, and that's why they're free, because I've got to keep it on the hush hush because I'm not qualified to teach it yet. I'm allowed to teach it, it's completely safe, I've been teaching it for years, but that's what the flow sessions are all about. So I'm dead excited about that. So you get to be guinea pigs for that if you want to be, and they're free. So they're in December and January. So you've not had already details, they'll be coming through. So hopefully I'll see one of them. I think I've done all right there. So 35 minutes past 7. I thought an hour, that would keep you, I could hope that I could keep you occupied for an hour. So thank you so much for staying until the bitter end. I've not seen anybody drop off, which is brilliant. And like I say, any questions, give me a shout. The link will be in the email that comes through, assuming it does come through, because I've been having some problems. Any questions? The chat is there if you want to question. I'm just looking on my iPad to see if any questions have come through and I can't see anything. But otherwise, if not, oh, there's Caroline. Hi, Caroline. Dash, hi from Kiwi land. Oh, thanks for showing up, Caroline. Appreciated. From New Zealand, all the way from New Zealand. Brilliant. Okay, all right, so if nobody wants me, I will sign off, and I'll see some of you in the morning for the group session and some of you for your individual sessions, and speak soon.